Okay. Hello, welcome. Welcome to our class. We are back to one of my favorite times of the year, Purim time, Megillat Esther time, and there's always lots to say on the subject. And I'd like to dedicate, first of all, tonight's class. Tonight is the yahrzeit of another strong woman. We celebrate Esther during Purim time, but another strong woman whose yahrzeit is tonight. First yahrzeit of Chana Bat Zev, Henriette Goodwin. Neshama should have an aliyah, and our learning tonight should be a merit for her and a merit for us. We should only see good things. The topic of the class, the title of the class is Measure for Measure in Megillat Esther. What Measure for Measure is, and we'll learn probably more about it in the text we'll see. And I'm not even sure we'll be able to get through the entire Megillah in today's class. We'll do the best we can, and whatever we don't finish, we'll push off till next week. But let's first discuss what Measure for Measure means. There's this concept known as measure for measure. In Hebrew, mida, kineged, mida. And we'll see that, like I said before, we'll see that in the actual text. And mida, kineged, mida means that H-Shem rules the world in a sort of reflexive manner. So what we do down here, for him, for instance, he repays in kind, exactly the way we meant it to happen. In one way, it good or bad comes back to us also in the exact same way. And you see this in a lot of ways. One of the reasons that I think this class tonight is so important is because of a discussion I overheard at my Shabbat table a few weeks ago. For better or for worse, I decided to sort of stay out of it. But there was a discussion, a very involved discussion, where somebody said that they didn't believe that H-Shem runs the world. Yeah, H-Shem made the world. I believe that. It makes a lot of sense. It's logical to say that there is a God and he created the world, but I have to keep the Torah. I have to keep kosher. All these stories, I'm supposed to believe them. It's a little much. So amongst other things that I popped in with every once in a while was the idea that perhaps such an argument is very weak. It's an easy argument to make without much thinking. In other words, the reason why people say such a thing is because it's very easy. It's very obvious that God created the world. We'll take that as a given. The next step that's not so obvious, or that I want to ignore perhaps, is that there's a reason why he made the world. And there's a reason why he made me. And I have to do something. And I have responsibilities. So in order to cut off that part of the argument, what people say is, okay, I believe the first part and I'll ignore all the rest. One of the most important themes throughout Megillat Esther, and really virtually throughout the entire Torah, is that Hashem runs the world. Hashem takes care of everything. There's a system of justice. It's one of the animamins of the Rambam. There is reward, there's punishment, and Hashem runs the world in a way that levies it out in a proper manner. But we often call mida kineged mida. So without further ado, I'm going to share a document with you, if I can, if nobody minds. I'm just kidding. I know nobody minds. And even if you do, you're not going to say anything. Let's see. Let's share this. If I remember where that big green button in the middle is. That's weird. It's not giving me that option. How's that possible? Okay, well, it worked now. Okay, so All right, measure for measure in Megillat Esther. So we're going to basically try to tell the entire story of Megillat Esther. I'll call it 10 chapters of it. It's really the 10th chapter only has 3 verses, so it's not really much of a chapter. But chapter 9 has double of the average, so it makes up for it. So it's really like 10 chapter book, and that's why it takes a good at least half hour to read. The 2 times we read it, Purim night and Purim day. We'll get into the halachot of that at a later time. Meanwhile, let's get into the actual text. We don't do this enough, and it's a beautiful text. It's part of Tanakh, right? It's Esther. It says in the Megillah. It says in the Gemara in Megillah that Esther approached the rabbis. She convinced them really logically to include this book into Tanakh, into what's called in English the biblical canon. So they finally agreed after they saw that there are important lessons in Megillat Esther, even though the book doesn't seem to be a Torah book, right? It doesn't mention God's name even once. Okay, the Jews are sort of characters here, at least minor characters. The main character marries is Esther, right? The title character, and she marries a goy. This isn't exactly with the ideal of Jewish literacy here, at least biblically. So let's find out how we can find these references to Megillat, to mida kineged mida in Megillat Esther in a way that tells the story all together, I think. First of all, there's a well-known, I'm not going to say famous because some people don't like that word. There's a well-known argument in the Talmud about when do you have to hear the Megillat Esther from? In other words, at what point do you have to hear it to fulfill your obligation of hearing it? Let's say you walk in late and you're a chapter late, 2 chapters late, but you hear certain parts, you didn't hear other parts, you left a little early. When do you, how much of the Megillah do you have to hear? So there are actually different opinions in the Talmud. That's not the halacha. Halacha is, by the way, just to make, just to smooth this out, make it very clear. Halacha is you have to hear every single word from the beginning, Vayehi, from there all the way till the very end, and Yisrael, whatever the last word of Megillat Esther is. So you have to hear every single word. So that's the halacha. No, l'chol zaro, right? Sorry, Yisrael is the last word in the Torah. So the you have to hear every single word. But the Talmud has a discussion about it, and really the discussion centers around what's the main theme of Megillat Esther. So why did the halacha devolve or evolve to be the entire thing? Because even the first chapter is important, because the first chapter has a lot of references to the idea of mida kineged mida, as we're about to see. So let's begin. First things first, chapter 1, verse 12. Chapter 1, verse 12. Interesting place to start. So we know that Achashverosh made a big party. There's a lot of detail to this party. Doesn't really explain why he made the party. That's where the rabbis come in and say, oh, he was celebrating the fact that the Jews were not freed yet, or he was trying to strengthen his power, or all kinds of reasons why he was making this party. The Gemara goes into it, the Midrash goes into it, but the text itself does not tell us why he had this party. Achashverosh has this major party, 180-day party, all pulled out all the stops. It's beautiful. It's gold, silver, amazing tapestries. The food is delicious. It's the highest 5-star quality review right there. Everything's perfect, right? And then he has an argument with his advisors. With his servants, and he says to them to send out, to bring out Vashti the queen. This is in the previous verse, the verse I don't have here, chapter 1, verse 11. So he says to bring Vashti and to show the officers how beautiful she was. All right, and then It says, "V'tima'ein hamalka Vashti," and the queen Vashti refused lavo to come. Midvar hamelach, she refused basically according to the word of the king. Asher biyad harisrim, that he sent through these messengers, eunuchs, chamberlains, whatever you want to call it. V'yiksof hamelach ma'od, and the king became very angry. V'chamato ba'aravo, and his anger burned inside him. So not only was he angry, but his anger burned inside him. We're not going to get into it. There's obviously commentaries explaining the differences. The Malbim is very beautiful over there. Now, why didn't she come out? So we have elsewhere other references to the idea that Vashti was not such a tsnua, such a nice, modest lady, that she didn't want to come out because she didn't want to show off her beauty. This is her chance to shine. And this is what she wanted to do more than anything else. This was her dream come true, to come out wearing the crown in front of everybody. Now, obviously, also it's important to know that when we say she was supposed to wear the crown, the Midrash, the Talmud, and other commentaries explain it was just the crown and nothing else. You're supposed to come out stark naked, wearing the crown to show off her beauty. Okay, that way you can't debate. Maybe she looks beautiful because she's wearing a certain corset or this or that, or it's the clothing, or no, she's beautiful because she's naturally beautiful. That was how they were going to prove that she's completely beautiful. So the Gemara, Megillah Yud Bet Amud Bet. This is already where the Megillah, or the Gemara in Megillah, goes into Agadita, tells basically the story pretty much in order of the Megillat Esther with the Midrashic commentary. Midrash also, but here's Agadita, similar type commentary. So it says, mida adam moded ba modedim lo. And this is this concept of mida kineged mida. This is why this is a good place to start. However a person acts, in the behavior of a person is exactly how he is acted upon, meaning by H-Shem. Vashti harosha mevia benot Israel. The evil Vashti would make the Jewish girls mafshitatan arumot. It made them work for her naked. And made them do malacha on Shabbat, made them break Shabbat naked. Okay? Why? Probably just to embarrass them. Might be other commentaries who say perhaps it was to make sure they wouldn't steal anything. All right. Behind the diktiv, and it says, there's a pasuk that tells us, as we're about to see later on in chapter 2, verse 1, it says, after he already gets rid of her, whatever that means, there's difference of opinion, whether he got her killed, whether he sent her away, whether he chopped off her head, she's getting her killed, by the way, or whether he imprisoned her, or whatever. Either way, he got rid of her. After all these things, this is the next chapter, right? When his anger calmed down, he remembered Vashti, and he remembered what she did. And that's what impressed him, says the Gemara. What impressed him the most, what was really a mind blower to him, is he realized that her behavior is how she got punished. She was asked to come out naked when she herself was making people be naked. Never mind, there's also on Shabbat, according to many commentaries, including the Gemara. Right? And what was decreed upon her. Kishem sh'asata, just as she did, kach nigzar aleha. That's exactly how the punishment came full measure back onto her. Measure for measure. Mida kineged mida. Explains the Ben Yehoyada, the Ben Ishai's commentary on the Talmud. So it says there that the angel Gabriel, why didn't she come out? She didn't come out because it says later on in that same page, it says that she grew a tail and she got the disease tsarat. Okay. That's what it says. And there's why those things. So the Ben Yehoyada explains, amongst other things, that there's a Gemara in Arachim, famous Gemara. This one is famous. You've heard this before, because usually whenever it comes time for Parshat Metzora, Tazria, right? So usually people talk about Sarat, and what's the number one thing that people get Sarat for? Here, Lashon Hara. But actually, that's from this Gemara in Arachim. That's not the only thing that you can get Sarat for. You can get Sarat for being conceited. You can get Sarat for being stingy. There's all kinds of other reasons to get Sarat. But Ben Yehoyada says this being conceited is the reason why Vashti got it, because that's how she was. She was somebody who really thought very highly of herself, and that's why she got Sarat. Again, mida kineged mida. And not only that, but Rav Elazar of Garmizia points out there's an interesting gematria. In that verse that we quoted, that she refused to come out, it says, Vayitma'en hamalka Vashti. Those three words equal 1,352. That's almost off by one, the gematria of the phrase Shafrichat Sarat, as the Gemara says. The Gemara's phrase Shafrichat Sarat, that she got Sarat, is also 1,350, in this case, 3. So it's off by one. When you're off by one, it still works in gematria. So the point is that her behavior is what got her exactly the punishment she deserved. Mida kineged mida. That's our first example. We will have many, many others. Don't worry. If you're not convinced yet, hold on to your hats. We're about to get into deeper stuff. This beautiful Ben Yehoyada is worth a read. I'd also like to share with you here, also in that source sheet, the Nefesh HaChaim, written by Rav Chaim Volozhner. So it's a very deep and in some places very Kabbalistic work. But one of the things that it talks about is this concept of mida kineged mida. Why does it work? What happens? So I'm just gonna skip down here to the English translation from Sefaria. He says here, talking about the point of the soul and everything else, and then he says, he quotes a verse in Tehillim which says, "Hashem tzilcha al yad yeminecha." Hashem is your shadow. What does that tell you? It implies that just like an object's shadow moves, just the same way that the original object moves, your shadow moves the way how you move, so too is how Hashem acts. You act in a certain way, Hashem's reaction is the exact same way. He joins in to move the worlds based on the movements and intentions of man's actions below. So it is explained in the Midrash, the Holy One said to Moshe, "Go and say to them, to Israel, that my name is I will be as I will be. Yeah. What is I will be as I will be? Just as you are with me, in that same way I am with you. I will be as close to you as you are close to me." So that's a classic example of mida kineged mida. And he quotes the Zohar, etc. So now we're going to skip down not too far to the very next verse. Already in the next verse, we have another example of mida kineged mida. The king is angry. Vashti wouldn't come down. She wouldn't come out. And now what's he supposed to do? So it says, Vayomer hamelech lechachamim. The king said to the sages, the wise people, Yodei itim, the ones who knew who know the times. Kichein devar hamelech lifnei kol yodei dat vadin. That is what the king always did. Keep that in mind. That's what the king always did to know what the law is. Right? Kol yodei dat vadin. To know the law and to know the knowledge, to have the knowledge and to have the law. He always consulted people. This king, for whatever reason, always consulted people. That's going to be very, very relevant at the end, as you will see. First of all, who are these wise people? Says the Gemara, Yud Bet. Again, back to Yud Bet. Vayomer Melech leChachamim. Man Chachamim. Who are these wise people? Rabbanan. These are the rabbis. How do you know? The next phrase. Yodeitim. They know the times. What does that mean? Yodim le'avar shneim le'kavoa hadashim. They're the rabbis. The rabbis are the ones who established the months, right? The rabbis are the ones who established the holidays. The court, and the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah tells us, the court established, meaning the rabbis. So who was the court? The rabbis, right? The court would establish when a Rosh Chodesh was, and when an Uber year needed to be established. A leap year like this year had to be done by people who know what's the ideal time. And those were the sages. How is this an example of mida kineged mida? So let's see. So he asks them what to do. And why did he want to know from them what to do? Why didn't he had advisors, as we're about to see? The next verse tells us, he had all kinds of people who were his advisors. He could have asked them. He asked these chachamim, he asked these rabbis, and they gave him an answer he didn't, that was not to his liking. They basically tried to stay out of it and they waited for the advisors to pop in, and they did. Or at least one of them did. But anyway, meanwhile, why did he ask them for their advice? Because he didn't want to punish her. You have to keep in mind who Vashti was. Vashti was actually the heir to the throne, although this is Persia, so women weren't kings or queens then. They were their husband was the king, and they were supposed to be subservient to them. But the reason why Achashverosh became the king was because he married her, and she had a connection to the Persian throne. She was the daughter of the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar, of all kinds of. She has an interesting lineage. We're not going to get into all that. The point is, he didn't know what to do about her because he didn't want to have a power struggle with her. He said to do something, and she said she refused, right? And so now what are we supposed to do? How do we deal with this? So he decided to ask the rabbis. And what did the rabbis say? The rabbis said, we're not sure. Right? So it says here in the Gemara, it says, what did they say? He said, judge it for me. And they said to him, what should we do? We don't know what to do. Shivka. Come is also Mulchuta. If we tell him to kill her, it's going to be an embarrassment to the kingdom. Sorry. Cut the killer. Maybe he's going to get upset about it. He's going to feel bad that he killed her, as actually he does in chapter 2, verse 1, as we've mentioned before. And then he's going to get back at us. We told him to kill her, and now he's going to get back at us. So we don't know what to do. If we tell him kill her, that's what he's going to do. If we say leave her alone, he's going to say that we're embarrassing the kingdom. We don't know what to do. And then so Amrulo, what did they say to him? Miyom shacharav beit hamikdash. From the time that you, not you, but your ancestors, the Persians, right, the Babylonians who destroyed the temple, from the time that you that the temple was destroyed, v'galinu me'artzenu, and we're taken away from our land. We don't have knowledge anymore. We can't give advice, especially we definitely don't know how to deal with capital cases, which, by the way, is the halacha, right? Even nowadays, no matter how poorly a Jew acts, a Jewish court cannot sentence anybody to death. Now that's an example of mida kineged mida. Why? Because it was their being quiet, their inability to answer because they didn't have the Beit HaMikdash, that basically eventually took Vashti's life. Let's say she got killed, right? What does that have to do with anything? So we know, there's other Gemaras and other Midrashim earlier, that it was Vashti who pushed Achashverosh to have this party because she wanted to make it concretely clear that the Jews would not rebuild the temple. Her stopping the rebuilding of the temple effectively ended her own life. where the sages could have possibly pardoned her. Now that there was no Beit HaMikdash because of her, mida kineged mida, there's no her. She dies because of her behavior to the Beit HaMikdash. All right, like I said, next verse. Next verse mentions these particular advisors of his. V'hakarov, Elav, Kashana, Sheitar, Admata, Tarshish, Meres, Marsana, Memuchan, Shiva Tsare Pras Madai. They're these ministers of Persia and Media, which, by the way, were a merged kingdom then, which is why there's a lot of mention throughout Megillat Esther of Persia, Media, like they're different places. It's all one place, and they're two nations that actually had some sort of power balance there. One had the courts and one had the monarchy, so kind of like the two bicameral legislature going on here. All right. Either way, there's a that kind of balance there. All right. Re'eh Pnei HaMelech Yayoshvim Rishona b'Malchut. They saw the face of the king, and they were the first there. So they were always there. So says the Gemara. I'm not going to get into the whole thing, but Amar Rabbi Levi. Rabbi Levi says in the Gemara again, Yud Bet Amud Bet. Kol pasuk zeh al shum karbanot ne'amar. Each one of these words in this verse, in other words, each of the names of these 7 advisors all have a reference to the karbanot. I'll give you just the first example. Karshana. Amr Malachi Ashar Lifnei Kadosh Baruch Ribbon Shalom Klum Karivi Lefanecha Karim Bnei Shana B'derech Krivu Yisrael Lefanecha. So Karshana is a 1-year-old sheep, from like the word Rishon, and all the other words as well have some sort of reference to different sacrifices, or some of the different sacrifices that were done in the Beit HaMikdash. What does that have to do with anything? Why is that an example of mida kineged mida? Same reason, because as Rav Moshe Meir Weiss points out, this advice that the king is going to be eventually forced to listen to is his downfall. And why did he have this downfall? Because he didn't have that Beit HaMikdash we just talked about. That all of his advisors are pointing out, even without trying, just their names alone should have hinted to the fact that there should be a Beit HaMikdash, and if there were a Beit HaMikdash, he'd be better off. But his own reluctance to rebuild it, his basically celebrating the fact that the Jews didn't have it, was all to his own downfall. All right, we're going to skip to chapter 1, verse 19. Just a little bit. Another example of mida kineged mida, the advisor who pipes in to speak to them. The Midrash says, the Gemara says that this is actually Haman, but his name that he's given in Megillat Esther is Memuchan. By the way, Memuchan means prepared, as if his fate is prepared for him. Again, mida kineged mida. So it says here, Im ala melech tov, if it's good for the king, if you agree, in other words, yetze dvar malchu lefanecha v'iktav bedate pras umada. Make sure that this is a document that comes out, that these are the rules of Persia Media. V'lo yavor asher lo tavo vashti lifnei hamelech achashverosh malchuta yitin hamelech leruata v'hatova mimena. So the Vashti is not allowed to come to the king Achashverosh anymore, and he should give her royalty to someone else who appears tova mimena, better than her. Now, obviously, it makes sense that that the king is going to want to choose somebody who's, if he's getting rid of a wife who's not good, doesn't behave, or whatever it is that's his rationale, obviously he's going to want a wife that's quote unquote better than her. That's obvious. So how can we understand this? So it says that the Dubno Maggid explains that there's a midrash that is showing that Hashem allows a characteristic that is seemingly negative aspect in one instant to have an exactly polar opposite effect elsewhere. Right? Obviously, this we would expect the next queen to listen to her husband, but we don't actually want that. We want somebody who can stand up to a bad decision that he made. So that in and of itself, especially with the phrase that Esther that's mentioned in that is better than you, which is similar to a phrase used in Shmuel Aleph regarding actually one of Esther's ancestors, is the when Shaul had to give up his kingdom for somebody who was better than him, which is David HaMelech, right? So that led the way to Esther's ascending the throne here. The Dubno Maggid explains again that this midrash is demonstrating how Hashem allows that kind of characteristic, that ability to be better than someone else, which in one case took something away from one person, to bring that same better than someone else allows that person then later to have an ascension to the throne. So that little phrase, that better than you, is what is another example of mida kineged mida. So it's mida kineged mida in one place where Shaul needed somebody who was better than him, and that turned out to be David, and his descendant Esther was the person who was better than someone else, and she became the queen, just like Shaul lost being the king because he was not better than someone else. Esther is better than someone else, and that's why she becomes the queen. I hope I said that in a way that was sort of clear. Another very, very important point about this verse that the Maharal makes in his commentary on Megillat Esther called Or Chadash. Sorry, not the Maharal. The Vilna Gaon also has a commentary on Megillat Esther. The Vilna Gaon says that there's a interesting poetic justice that happens. What is Memuchan doing here? He's saying to get rid of Vashti. She's not to be seen again. And he's telling the king that, in fact, he should not ask this kind of advice. He should just do it and never have to worry about asking advice again, which is going to end up not so good for Haman himself. Right? If Memuchan is Haman, as almost all the commentaries say, so his own advice for the king not to have to ask advice before killing somebody or getting rid of somebody is exactly what gets Haman killed later on. When Achashverosh at the very, very end of the story, chapter 7, verse 9, where he says, hang him, without saying, let me consult my advisors first about what I should do with Haman. Now, he doesn't have to do that anymore. Haman said, you don't have to ask advice anymore. That's old school. From now on, you don't have to ask advice anymore. So what does Achashverosh do? He doesn't ask advice. And so Haman's life is very easily taken away with just a snap of his fingers. Hang him, he's hanged. He's gone. All right, all of that was all in chapter 1 of Megillat Esther. And I can't overemphasize enough something I said before. I don't know if everybody was in the class already by then, but I'll say it again. It's worth remembering. All of Megillat Esther is important, which is why the halacha says you have to hear all of it. Oh, I just missed a party. Not important. Esther's not even mentioned. Mordecai's not even mentioned. Haman is not even mentioned there by name. Nothing important happens. The Jews' the Jews aren't threatened yet until the end of the next chapter. This is nothing. By the end of chapter 3 is when the Purim story happens in great force. So a lot of the story happens years and years before. I believe we'll see that in fact the Achashverosh was married to Esther for 12 years before the events of Purim started and ended, all within a very short time, as we'll see. God willing, in other classes probably. Let's first see chapter 2, verse 1. Like we said before, we quoted this before. This is the Gemara tells us Kshoch Achamat of Hamelech Achashverosh Zachar et Vashti. He remembered Vashti that Asher Asata and what she did that Asher Nigzar Allah, and he remembered how she was punished. What exactly the decree was. The decree was in full measure exactly as she behaved. That's that mida kineged mida that the Gemara uses as its example. It says this book is full of mida kineged mida, and this is the example. The Maharil Diskin asks, why did we need this? Why did the Talmud, the Midrash, why did it have to tell us that Vashti made such terrible use of our sisters, of the Jewish women, made them naked on Shabbat? What's the point of all this? Isn't it bad enough that they had to desecrate Shabbat? Why do you have to also tell us that they were immodest because of her? Don't we already know how evil Vashti is? Remember, there's other Midrashim, other Gemaras that tell us Vashti was not a good person. Forget about what modern feminist criticism tells you. The Vashti is the heroine, right? The poor woman was mistreated. She stood up for herself. That's not how the Midrash, that's not how the Gemara understands it. Because if that were the case, she wouldn't have been, there'd be no reason for her to be punished in the Jewish concept of women. So the Maharil Diskin asks why this had to be mentioned. He answers that Vashti's participation in this was especially worthy of punishment, because one can reason that poor servants surrounded by expensive goods might try to steal something. So, okay, so you might want to keep them a little underdressed. You know, I've heard that sometimes even manufacturers of illegal narcotics, what they do is they make sure that the people who work for them aren't wearing very much clothing at all, so to make sure they're not hiding any of the drugs, in their clothes or anything. So maybe these servants are surrounded by in the palace, so you want to make sure they never steal anything, so they keep them naked. Maybe that's your, when the union comes and asks Vashti why she does this, maybe that's going to be her excuse. However, it was especially evil of Vashti to force the Jews to do this on Shabbat, because not only would they not have stolen anyway, because stealing is not allowed, but they certainly would not have stolen on Shabbat. They can't carry it out, right? Carrying is one of the 39 forbidden actions of Shabbat. So for sure they wouldn't have done that. So they didn't have to at all be naked. So why did she do it? She did it especially only. She had no excuse. If you took her to court to ask her why she did it, no matter what her argument would be, it would fail, because she had no reason to do it, and she did it only because she was purely evil. And that's why she was punished that way. That's why there's a mida kineged mida, and why this is such a prime example of mida kineged mida. Okay, we're going to skip a few verses. Esther chapter 2, verse 3. V'yafked hamelech b'kidim. And the king should appoint, this is again, Achashverosh doesn't know what to do. He needs a new wife, so he asks advice, and he asks advice from his advisors, right? And what they say, and this is again the Gemara says, and the Midrashim say that this is Haman giving this advice. He should choose, he should appoint people, all the countries, Malchuton, all of his kingdom. They should look for non-married girls, Tovat Mare, right? Who are beautiful, El Shushan Habiran, and bring them to Shushan, El Beit Hanashim, to the house of the women. In other words, to his harem, right? Al Yad Hege Saris Hamelech, that's being run by this guy Hegai, who is one of the eunuchs who runs things for the king, one of the chamberlains of his. Shomer Hanashim, he's the guard of the women. Venaton Tam Rukehen, and he will give them all kinds of ointments and mascara and lipstick or whatever else they need to make themselves up to be pretty. Doesn't seem like a case of mida kineged mida yet, right? Until you see the midrash. And then the midrash tells us we have that he should appoint these hold on. Yeah, let's just get into the English here. I just want to show you what yeah, it says here yeah. So it quotes the verse, and then it says, why, what did he see? Why did he do this? Why did he have to gather in all these women? So it says, Mara, what did he see? Amar Rabbi Huna al Yedei Sheyu Mevazod Mibnot Israel Ku'urot. That the Persian women were making fun of the Jewish women, saying that they were ugly, they weren't attractive, they're not as, they don't have the same mustaches that the Persian women had, whatever. Okay, so they were made fun of them. Ve'ein kol bria mashkiach alehem lefichach ba'u lidei mefasek hazeh. And because they were comparing their appearance to the appearance of the Jewish women, so that's why they were punished by having to be basically kidnapped, right? This is and prostituted to the king. That's basically what happened. Not only that, but the Midrash Gemara tells us that these women weren't all virgins. Some of them were married women. Well, whoever was pretty was gathered together anyway, and they were brought to the king. And once he slept with them, they had to stay in this house of this harem for the rest of their lives, away from their families, away from their children, right? Away from their husbands. Doesn't matter what life they were leading before. They had no say in the matter. So this punishment, this awful punishment that they received, was in measure for how they acted towards the Jewish women. They said, "Oh, you're ugly. You'll never win a beauty contest." Oh well, now let's see what kind of a beauty contest you get to win. So all of these are examples so far of mida kineged mida. Now we're probably not going to finish with all the examples I have here, but let's use a few more, and then we'll continue in the class next week. Yeah, let's go to the next verse, which is quite a bit later in chapter 3, verse 8. And in chapter 3, verse 8, we're introduced already in chapter 3 to Mordechai and to Haman and to Esther. All the main characters are introduced all the way in chapter 3. Still, we need to have chapter 2. Still have to have chapter 1. But here you have, I'm sorry, no, Esther was introduced in chapter, no, wait. Hold on. Should I have this? Mordecai and Esther are introduced already in chapter 2. I apologize. But Haman is certainly, in case we haven't had him before, we have him here for the first time by name. This is the first time you spin the grogger. Vayomer Haman, bu l'melech Achashverosh. In chapter 3, verse 8, he's already been mentioned a few times. So this is where he says his lashon hara to get the Jews killed. And the main thing that got him all upset is because everybody's bowing down to him, except for Mordechai. Mordechai refuses to bow down to him. Why he refuses? It's a whole long discussion. Probably not for now. But what he says is V'yomer Haman l'melech Achashverosh yeshno am echad. We usually translate yeshno as there is, like yesh. Except there's a weird thing here. It's not yesh. It's yeshno. It's not English. It's not like there isn't. Right? Yeshno am echad. There is a nation. Mefuzar, mefurad. They're scattered. They're dispersed. Bein ha'amim, from all the other nations. They don't get along with your other nations. And he gives them some halachic examples. They take all these days off. They're not working every Saturday. They have lots of holidays. These guys, they just don't fit. All right. So he's saying all this kind of lashon hara about the Jewish people, and of course he eventually says, let's get rid of them. It's not. He says, "Enam osim lamelech in shova lahanicham." It's not worth it for you to keep them alive. So says the Gemara in Megillah, Yud Gimel Amud Bet. The Gemara says, "Yeshno am echad." There is a nation, and now we're going to explain this weird word yeshno, which should have been just yesh. Amarava. Leika diyada lishana bisha kehaman. Nobody ever said lashon hara as bad as Haman. He's such a terrible baal lashon hara, always trying to make arguments in machloket. Amarle, what does he tell them? Ta nichlinhu. Amarle mistefena melahehu delo la'avid bi keda'abed ked'kamai. Amarle yesh no min ha-mitzvot. There's yashnu min ha-mitzvot. They don't serve their own God. They don't even do their own thing. Not only are they not listening to your laws, they don't even listen to their own laws. What kind of people are these? And his proof is this word yeshno, because not only is yeshno yesh, like there is, it's also seemingly related to the word yashan, sleeping. He's saying that their God is yashan, their God is sleeping. Why is he sleeping? Because they are sleeping. Let's see what that means. All right? They have been asleep with respect to the mitzvot, and therefore don't have to be afraid of getting rid of them. That whole last phrase where he said, the king can get rid of them. It's okay, no problem. What does that mean? It means you have no resistance. There's nothing is going to stop you from getting rid of them. Nothing is protecting them. What do you mean? Isn't Hashem protecting us? Hashem Hashem is always awake. Hashem is never sleeping. Hashem is always guarding the Jewish people. So how is Haman not afraid to say such a thing? So in Or Gedaliahu, my Rosh Yeshiva's father, Rav Gedalia Shor, cites the Nefesh HaChaim that we quoted earlier, that these two opinions are not contradictory, because when the Jews act with Hashem with indifference, mida kineged mida, measure for measure, Hashem looks at them with indifference too. Think about it. When we do what we're supposed to do, Hashem does what he's quote unquote supposed to do. He protects us when we deserve to be protected. But when we're doing the opposite, when we're pushing Hashem away, Hashem says, oh, you want to push me away? I push you away too. Again, mida kineged mida. Hashem acts with us as we act to him. Just like a shadow. You push away a shadow, the shadow is pushing you away too, right? Same thing. Hashem tilcha al yad yaminecha. Same thing here. Hashem is doing exactly what we're doing. What we do to him, he's doing to us. We're yashan, we're sleeping, we're not doing mitzvot, we're not coming to minyan, we're not keeping the mitzvot, we're not keeping Shabbat, we're not, whatever it is, Hashem does the same to us. You don't want to meet me? I won't meet you. It's okay. I'll meet someone else. That's fine. So we now have that the very, very core of the whole Megillah story, this right here, this verse, where the Jewish people's existence is threatened, it's only able to be threatened because of mida kineged mida, because of the same characteristic that we've been talking about throughout this class so far. I think we have time for at least one more. And by the way, I don't know if you've been keeping track, but according to my calculations, we have about 10 examples already of mida kineged mida in Megillat Esther. That's just 10. right? And it's telling the story, I think, pretty effectively. We get some reminders of what happened and why. Now, when Esther married the king, Mordecai, for whatever reason, made sure that she would not reveal that she was Jewish. And the king had a big problem with that. He kept asking her, "Who are you?" He tried to bribe her. He tried to bribe other nations. He made a whole party. He tried to make her jealous. He tried to marry another woman. There's all kinds of stuff that happens in Megillah. And this is not this is not the midrashim. This is in the actual text of Megillat Esther. So on and on and on. He tries to do all kinds of things. And eventually, Mordecai, once they find out that there's a plot to kill the Jews, Mordecai tells Esther, okay, now's the time. You need to tell him that you're Jewish and to save the Jewish people. And she's a little bit resistant. He convinces her. All right. So the problem is she's not allowed to go in front of the king unannounced. We don't know why this rule exists. Let's just take that as a given. Okay. So for whatever reason, the king needs for there to be an announcement, or for him to invite his wife to come. But she comes and he accepts her and she's safe, and she invites him to a party, and in the party she also invites Haman. And then the very next that night of the party, the king can't sleep, and that's what we're up to here. Chapter 6, verse 1, after the king can't sleep. But one thing I missed, we would be remiss to miss this, is that the previous verse, the last verse in chapter 5, verse 14, has Haman and his family, his wife Zeresh, and all of his sons, and all of his friends, building the gallows on which to hang Mordecai. Okay? This is going to be important to understand what happens next. You can't just kill Mordecai, though, because Mordecai might be in the king's good graces. Remember, Mordecai saved the king's life. Also, earlier in Megillat Esther, there was an incident where two people tried to assassinate the king. There's different commentaries who say that Haman was sort of in on this plot too. We're not going to get into it right now. But either way, Mordecai told the queen, and the queen told Achashverosh. Achashverosh realized at that point anyway that Mordecai was worth at least keeping around for advice, and that's why Mordecai spent pretty much the rest of Megillat Esther usually perched outside the palace, outside the king's palace. So king can't sleep, and he doesn't know what to do. Balaylahu nidadosh nat hamelech vayomer evi et sefer hazifronot diver hayamim vayu nikraim lifnei hamelech. He decides he's going to read his history book to help him go to sleep. Okay? We know there's different commentaries about this, but one of the reasons that he wanted his history book was because he was a little concerned. Why couldn't he sleep? He couldn't sleep because he felt like maybe what's Haman doing at this party? Why did Esther invite him? And by the way, that's one of the reasons she invited him to this party, was to create this kind of jealousy and this kind of paranoia. So he was worried, like, why is Haman and Esther? Maybe they're colluding. Maybe they want to assassinate me. Maybe they want to take over my kingdom. Maybe Haman's going to marry Esther and become the king himself. I don't know what's going on. Who's going to help me? Why isn't anybody helping me? Why isn't anybody telling me what's going on? Let me look at my history. Maybe my history will tell me what went on that nobody wants to help me. Did I do something? Did I forget to reward somebody? And in fact, he did. He never rewarded Mordecai for saving his life. That's what he's about to find out. But meanwhile, the pages themselves, it says, Vayu nikraim lifnei hamelech. They were read before the king. This is called passive language. And almost always when any kind of text uses a passive language, it's to distract the reader from realizing who is actually doing this. We don't know who did this. Who read this? Was it his advisor? Was it one of his queens? Was it a eunuch? Who read this to the king? So, in fact, The Gemara says, Gemara Tet Vav Amud Bet, way on the bottom, Vayu Nikrim, that they were read. Melamed Shnekraim Me'alehen. They themselves read themselves. The words magically, like a video on your cell phone, they read themselves. Right? Why? So it says later on, because this he had other advisors. Shimshai was one of his scribes, and he didn't want to mention the fact that Mordecai saved his life, so he kept erasing it or skipping over it, and Gavriel, the angel, would come and rewrite it. That's how the Gemara describes it. So so the question becomes, why did that happen? Why would we need a miracle like that? So Rabbi Yehonatan Eibschutz explains that this miracle is very necessary. He tells us that there's a famous Gemara, famous because we've mentioned it in other contexts quite often, that when the Jews were at Har Sinai and they accepted the Torah with Nasav and Nishma, the reason that they did that, part of the reason, was because Hashem had a mountain over them and threatened to drop it on them if they wouldn't accept that. Why did he do that? Well, they were about to accept the Torah anyway, weren't they? So the Tosfot in the Gemara there answers that the Jews accepted the written law. They were unhappy or not exactly confident, that's a better way to put it, not exactly enthusiastic about the oral law. Because what's the oral law? It's all the rabbis, and who says that this rabbi has authority over me? And what if it's a halacha I don't like? And what if I don't want to keep it? And then there's this punishment and that punishment. I don't want the rabbis to be involved. I want directly me and Hashem. Hashem tells me all the laws and anything else, anything from the rabbis, the Mishnah. I don't need to hear that. That's how the Jews were. And Hashem lifted up the mountain to show how serious it was, how important it was for them to accept all of the Torah. Now, they did not accept, they eventually accepted the Torah, but they did not, obviously, because they had a mountain over them, they did not accept the oral law enthusiastically. It was not enthusiastic. So, mida kineged mida, because they did not appreciate the oral words of the Torah, this book is read to Achashverosh orally, not written. The words were being erased. They weren't there. But somehow the voice of the reader emanated and oral words came out, and the Jews were saved and Mordecai was honored, all because of the oral law that's in this book that's being read to Achashverosh. The written word was gone. The written word was not accepted. The written word was being erased. But the oral law stood up and the oral law remained. That's exactly how Torah works today for us as well. We no longer have, unfortunately, Beit HaMikdash. We no longer have the Sanhedrin. We don't have the great rabbis that we had of yesteryear. But the rabbis we have today continue the oral law and bring the Torah down, and that's what lets Judaism stay. That's how Judaism stays strong. That's how Judaism continues from generation to generation. I want to remind everybody that today's class was dedicated in the memory of Chana Bat Zev. The Neshama should have an aliyah, and all of us should have merit from her zchut yagin aleinu, and we should only hear good news and good things from everybody. Thank you for listening.
Yeah.